Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. I am thrilled you are here with us today. Our purpose is to share stories, ideas, and tools to help you on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Let's meet this week's guest. I have Rob Arndt with us today, and I am thrilled, listeners, because Rob and I had a chance to do a LinkedIn Live event a couple months ago about veterans in the workplace. And it was very, very well received. And so I thought Rob needs to come on the podcast and share his story because he is CEO and founder of BufferSprings, a veteran-owned training and consulting firm that builds customized military veteran recruitment, engagement, and retention programs for smart companies. He himself is a 14-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps. 8 of those years focused on armed forces recruitment and retention. Since transitioning from the service, he has spent the past decade working consultatively with Fortune 500 companies, federal agencies, government contractors, educators to build effective military, veteran, and diversity recruitment and compliance systems. His organization, BufferSprings, leverages a vast array of insider connections, cutting-edge HR technology, and an expansive community of relationships to build the best veteran talent acquisition, engagement, and retention solutions that provide short-term and long-term results. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Julie. It's great to talk with you again.
Yeah. Well, tell our listeners, obviously you spent some time in the military yourself that I'm sure was a catalyst for getting this started, but what was your aha moment? Like, what was your moment you're like, I have to do something to solve this bigger problem?
Yeah, so it was actually when I transitioned out. So, as veterans, we have preparation classes, which is called Transition Assistance Program or the TAP program. And it's a 2.5-day course to teach you how to be a civilian after spending X amount of years in the military. So I, like a lot of veterans, did not have the smoothest transition ever. I went off to a federal contractor for a little while, quickly found out that it wasn't a good cultural fit for me for a plethora of different reasons, but thought everything was almost the same as the military, or that it was going to be the same kind of like flawless like path of execution, so to speak, that I had in the military. Quickly found out that it wasn't. And this was about a decade ago, and started coming up with all these great ideas of ways to help veterans with their transition and make it smoother. Before jumping into it myself, I decided to, get some work experience, worked with some very smart agencies along the last 10 years, connecting organizations to military talent before setting out on my own and hanging up my own shingle at the beginning of this year and establishing BufferSprings finally. So the idea I had 10 years ago is finally to fruition. It kind of kicked myself about not doing it earlier, but at the same time, I don't think I would know what I know now to be able to, properly equip the business with everything that I needed to have that point of understanding. So I'm glad I'm here where I'm at, and finally getting to do my life's work and actually, loving life in this new endeavor.
Yeah, that's a cool story. Yeah, usually with decisions that we regret, it's not necessarily what we did, but what we didn't do or didn't do it soon enough, to your point. So it's never too late, listeners. Get a dose of inspiration from this one. If you had an idea, a thought, it's not too late to put that into action. I know I think about my 12 years in corporate before starting this business focused on diversity. And there was a lot of lived experience that was good for contextual, like much like your own experience. But then it's like, wow, all that time that I could have spent doing more impactful work too. But you had to have that context to know how to apply it too. So there's always a pro and a con to decisions. But Rob, I'm curious, this problem, veterans, tell our listeners more about why this is really an issue. And from a diversity perspective, I often feel like, the big 4 variables we talk about, of course, gender, race, LGBTQ plus, and disability, often veteran status, it kind of gets lost in that conversation around diversity. So tell our listeners why that's a problem, like why this is an issue and why it needs to be a part of your diversity strategy.
Yeah, 100%. And I see that a lot, where a lot of companies don't even include veterans as a underrepresented group or a diversity category, when in reality, I mean, for working age veterans and veterans within the workforce, we make up less than 5.5% of that working population. So we are, in fact, an underrepresented group with a lot of unique experiences from our past, where our counterparts, we had that fork in the road when we graduated high school to either go off to college, go off to the workforce, or go into the military. And it seems like less and less people, even in now having strains in recruitment and everything else, less and less people are going into the military every year. And that's evident in the stats. But what I see with the military is that we have our own strengths and weaknesses when we transition out. The strengths are the experience, the millions of dollars of training and equipment and things that we've done like throughout our time, and formal leadership training that we've done throughout our time in the military. That's a highly marketable skill. But then we also have these non-traditional backgrounds that sometimes scares people. Our resumes may not match up in keywords and algorithms and things that are out there in the ATS because it may be different names for something. Where in the Marine Corps, it's a motor transport operator. We're here, it may be a CDL driver. So there's a lot of direct translation issues. But one of the things with the military is that, and one of the things that kept me in for so long and that I loved the most about the military was the diversity aspect of that you had different people from all different parts of the world speaking different languages, religions, different belief systems, even different parts of our own country that are so, California is different than Massachusetts, is different from Texas. We have almost separate countries and separate divisions within our own, United States here. But with veterans, we all come together from all these different walks of life. We're all green. We're all focused on the same mission. And I've seen beautiful things happen when all of those, auxiliary things are put off to the side and people are just focusing on getting their best work done and taking care of the person to their left and the right of them. So that's what kept me in the military for so long, and why I believe in this populace, and why it's such a big key point for me to focus on with organizations of tapping into this really great underrepresented group to help them move the needle forward. But where I see a lot of those things fail is that some organizations, if they are smart enough to have veterans as part of their strategy, it's not on a position of power, or it's not to push the organization forward or to bring better people into the organization. It's usually on the premise of either patriotism, which is a beautiful thing by itself, or charity, which is a beautiful thing by themselves. But they're both terrible reasons to bring on any sort of talent pool, especially military veterans.
Oh, 100%. I know one of your personal pet peeves is military friendly.
Yes.
Why
Yes.
is that?
Because it's so easy. It's such a anecdotal thing. It's just saying like, we're friendly to military. Like, why would you not be friendly to military? It's like, I'm not friendly to restaurant workers, or I'm not friendly to people who went to college. Like, so the whole military friendly concept, it just has like this buzzword. And I think it's just like a check in the box for a lot of companies to say that they're friendly, but it doesn't take commitment. It doesn't take investment. I jokingly say that BufferSprings is the number one most civilian friendly company possibly ever. But there's no way to call me out on that. But you can be military friendly just by saying you are. But being military effective is what we focus on with organizations, of actually putting the investment into it, understanding this talent pool, creating a inclusive ecosystem for this specific talent group to grow and do great things within another organization post-military. So it's something that, it's well intentioned for organizations, but it's poorly executed on the back end side when you just say you're military friendly, but not actually showing where vets can grow and do great things within your organization, or that you understand the great things that this group can bring to your organization to diversify your company.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell our listeners more about that. What are some of the transferable skills and the values and the experiences that, if you really were military effective and genuinely supportive of bringing that talent into your organization, what are some of the benefits you would see from diversifying your workforce with more veterans?
Well, there's the obvious ones for veterans specifically. And even when I'm working with groups, I'll say, hey, what are some things that are some words that come out when I say the word veteran or military? What comes to mind? And it's esprit de corps, it's pride of belonging, it's leadership, it's the ability to follow and execute orders and do things in a stressful scenario, which are great for any company to have and great attributes, but they're not subject to just veterans. And those are almost generalized terms that I've seen a lot of civilians who have never served in military or worn a uniform that are great leaders or can work in ambiguous, chaotic circumstances and lead people. So it's not something that's just subject to the military. What I will say with the military, though, is, and this will resonate with any company or organization, is that in the military, missions are non-negotiable. Like, they have to happen. We all see KPIs and goals and all these things that can fail or falter, these lofty, destinations that we're striving towards. But in the military, a mission is a mission. It doesn't matter if you have the right people, the right personnel, the right resources, budget, tools, whatever. The mission needs to get done come hell or high water. And I think that's something that is sunk into the brains of military personnel, whether they serve 4 years or 40 years, where they're still very mission focused when they leave companies, of getting that job done, doing it to the best of their ability, and performing at that high level. So for those kind of things, that's one thing that I know resonates well with organizations. Not to mention where we're diversifying our organizations more, especially with the onset of remote work and new opportunities opening up there. You used to have companies that were based in South Dakota, that there's not a lot of diversity there and whatnot, but now they're fully remote. So they're going to be kind of breaking down those barriers, those walls, and will need to know how to work with people from different scenarios, different walks of life. We're military candidates. We've been doing this our entire careers, and we're looking for environments like that because we thrived in them. We thrived in those environments before. So those are two things that I would point out for employers: is challenging yourself, bringing on mission focused people that are used to working with other mission focused people, and just getting the job done, regardless of all these superior or superficial things that may be on the side.
Yeah. I love that. Like the mission is non-negotiable. Like it has to happen, much like a KPI and a key decision for the business. So, and you figure it out. I mean, what I'm hearing from that is just that problem solving mentality, that somebody that's been in lots of different situations with lots of different people and lots of different types of resources and had to think through problems live. What a valuable skill set that could be brought in. And I love what you said earlier too. I was reminded by just how we get lost in translation with our industry terms and our jargon. That's just so bad for diversity in general. But you bring up a great example of just somebody has might feel like a very different experience. Think about how that is more similar to what their experience might be like in a corporate setting. Of course, the environment is different, but what is similar versus what is different? I think we tend to polarize things more than we maybe need to.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm curious, Rob, what are some of the myths around veterans that people have stereotypes or just are misinformed? Somebody that's been living like myself as a civilian for their full career. What do they not get sometimes about veterans?
Well, here's the thing: is there are so many different sources to get information about veterans. But the thing is, with any diversity category or anybody who's trying to boost the needle in diversity categories, it's bias is the actual killer of diversity. So the bias is the things that we create in our own brains, the way that we were raised and whatnot. There's not as much out there for civilians. There's no movies on what an HR business partner is doing on a daily basis, but there's tons of movies about what military folks are doing on a daily basis. But they're only showing the cool stuff, the sexy stuff, the people jumping out of helicopters, and Top Gun being the top movie of of the summer. That's the cool stuff about the military. However, it makes up a very small population of the military that are doing combat arms jobs or these high-speed fighter pilots and whatnot. The majority of us, about 88% of the military, are coming from a supportive environment. We have HR people, we have IT and cybersecurity people, we have blue collar roles, gray collar roles, white collar roles, entry level executives. Not everybody is jumping out of helicopters, blowing stuff up and fighting bad guys in the name of mom and America and apple pie and all this overseas. Some of us are doing pretty mundane jobs, while we're in, but it's a supportive organization. The best thing that I'll say, or best way I'll say to frame the military, is don't think of it. And a lot of people see us as we're coming from this weird distant planet somewhere and we speak these different languages and we're, raised in this weird universe somewhere else, when in reality, Department of Defense is a Fortune 1 company, where your Fortune 500 company may be building widgets or robots or selling insurance or whatever it does. Our job was to fight battles and win wars and support those individuals on the front line that were doing that. So if you think of it as just coming from another competitor, doesn't matter if you have similar industries, people leaving Liberty Mutual and going to Farmers Insurance, they'll still have to learn those different cultures, different ways of doing business, when in reality, you're doing almost the same functions of a job. It's the same thing with the military, where the majority of us have been doing something that is a functional category, or there's over 7,000 different military occupational specialties in the military, and about 90% directly transfer over into civilian crosswalks. However, we see these stereotypes and all these people just doing wartime things where we don't see where they fit into our environment because a bias has been built up. Even myself, with the word veteran, when I transitioned out and somebody told me I was a veteran for the first time, I thought of that guy in a VFW hall wearing a weird, red fez hat with, gadgets and gizmos and ribbons and stuff on it. Like I didn't think of myself as a veteran. I just thought, hey, I transitioned from this chapter of my life of learning things in the military. I still have a lot of gas left in the tank and a lot of things to do in my civilian life that I'm going to use this experience and use these things that I learned to apply them in this next chapter in life. But we don't necessarily think of it that way. We think of it as like this obscure population that we have to somehow jam into our culture, when in reality, I was a human being when I was serving in the Marine Corps for 14 years. I was a civilian when I joined, and I'm a civilian now. So, I mean, there's really not that big of a disparity. It's really what we make of it in our minds and what we think of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how it does conjure images, like you said, like Top Gun, or, these like
Right.
really like, yeah, like such a small percentage of the military is actively, and even if that is your role, you're probably not actively doing those things all the time.
Right.
So those support roles bring a ton of diverse experiences, diverse types of approaches and skills and perspectives. So love everything you just said there. I wonder, Rob, too, like there's a stigma around PTSD, and can you share more about why that is and why that's really not a big issue in the military community? Not as much as people make it out to be, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that's one of the elephants in the room that I usually have to address with in my employer partners and organizations that we work with. But with PTSD, I mean, the thing that I want to put out there is that PTSD is a human issue. It is not subject to just the military. You have people in your office right now that have been bit by a dog. They've been in a car accident. They had a traumatic childhood or a life event that came up, but they've never served in the military or worn a uniform in any capacity. At the latest study that I've seen, I think 12.5% of military veterans identify as having PTSD. It's not as widespread as one would think. And even though, the cases that are there, people in the military see a lot of crazy things, especially the last 20 years that we've been in war. That probability of seeing something that may be outside of the norm goes up. However, we're trained for what we're going to see. We're trained for what we're going to potentially do. And then we're debriefed and we're taken care of when we come back. So there are veterans that still need help with things like that. And there are resources for those individuals, just like there's resources for our civilian counterparts that may be having mental health issues or things like that they need, that they need help with. But it's not as widespread or as prevalent as the news portrays it out to be. I think especially with veterans, there's a big stigma out there. And this is something that we help organizations navigate is for veterans alone, there are 47,000 nonprofits, veteran service organizations, veteran support organizations. The majority of them look the same. It's, hire military, recruit military, hire veterans, recruit veterans, red, white, and blue logos. Everything is hero this or victim this. And as veterans, it's hard to cut through that when we get out and we see these 47,000 nonprofits or the sea of goodwill that we call it. A lot of veterans don't know what services to plug into or what narrative to believe. Even myself, when I was transitioning out of the Marine Corps, I did my time and left honorably, but I kept being hit with all these narratives that like you're a victim and that America owes you this debt of gratitude for stepping up and serving when it's a volunteer force. Nobody told me to do this. I volunteered myself to serve my country, and that was my decision to do that. It's like I don't feel that I'm owed anything for that or that I'm a hero because I served. Like I served honorably, but I'm nobody's hero other than hopefully my own, children at the end of the day. But and even the individuals that I've served with some real life heroes, but they're the last people who would ever call themselves that. So these different narratives and categories and boxes that veterans get put into is annoying because we're all individual people with individual skill sets and backgrounds and everything else that we do. Like no two veterans that I've ever met are the same, just like no two companies are the same. And I hate being clumped into those narratives or thrown into those different boxes that are out there just based on stereotypes and biases. So,
Well, it reminds me of so many of folks that have a different dimension of diversity face that monolith type of reaction of you're this, right? Put you in the box. You are a veteran. You are ABC based on, like you said, patriotic, imagery that you might have consumed, your own experiences, people we have a tendency to be like, they're all like this because it makes it easier for our brain to think like, but it's really not, right? That's really not helpful, of course, in like a real life setting. And I love what you said about just honoring the humanity of the experience. There's so many things you shared in your story that as humans, I think we can connect on and relate to, regardless of the fact you were in the military or not.
Right.
So thinking about the work you do with organizations, Rob, I'm curious, when you engage with organizations and they're like, hey, we don't have a lot of veterans, we want to recruit more veterans, we want to hire more veterans, like wherever like their business problem is, what strategies do you find helpful to help organizations kind of get more inclusive with veterans?
Yeah, great question. So we have a 5-step framework, especially even when we're doing webinars or doing these, any kind of public appearances or speaking engagements. We want to make it easy for companies to digest this and to put a great plan into place. And it's really not all that complicated. So we have a formula here, which we call Mount Ben, which is an acronym, which military uses a lot of acronyms. So, but Mount Ben is MTBEN. So the M is your mission. What is your mission? Are you going to hire 5 veterans? Are you going to hire 500? But setting up an actual mission that can, that can be accomplished. I see CEOs get out there and say, hey, we're going to make 75% of our population veterans over the next 5 years. But they didn't look at the fact that we make up less than 5.5% of the population. So the numbers don't stack up with a lot of these lofty goals. But your mission has to be something that can be attained. It's got to be a stretch. It's got to be a challenge, but it has to be something that can be attained. Once you have that mission, that's the point that you're plugging into the GPS, into your destination. The next point, the T in Mount Ben, is going to be the team, getting the right primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders behind this, and then educating your people on what military is, what military is not. Military 101, the difference between branches of service, enlisted versus officer, reserve versus active, and just having a baseline knowledge of what you're going to see in this population that you're engaging with. So you have to educate them. You have to employ the right people and have the right stakeholders, the right people in the right positions, whether it's your executive champions and your senior leaders behind this, or your sourcers, screeners who are looking at resumes and either screening people in or screening people out. So you're building your team and then empower those people. Give them the budget, the resources, the clout that they need to move the needle. Don't just have this useless figurehead that you made like, hey, Julie's a veteran, let's make her the veteran recruiter. That doesn't work. It's got to be intentional. So you have your mission, your team, then you have your brand of what are you looked at it through a military set of lenses. How does your employer brand resonate with that population? So you have your actual brand. Are you putting out stock images of somebody wearing a camouflage pajamas with an upside down salute and a backwards flag, but that's supposed to resonate with our people? Like, you're not doing yourself any favors. It's well intentioned, but it's poorly executed. Have your veterans look at your brand. If you have vets that work there, say, hey, Julie, you know what? I know you served in the military. How's this image look to you? Your vets are going to tell you if you're off mark, and they're doing it to take care of you because they want other vets to work around them. So you have your brand, and then you have your experience of what does that look like? When was the last time you looked at your own archaic, poorly written job descriptions that were regurgitated since 1985? Like, change those up. Or the experience of you're trying to attract veterans, you're going to job fairs, and then I finally apply to a job as a veteran, and now I go into an ATS black hole or nobody gets back to me. You're not, what does that experience look like? Or even onboarding or working there. Like, when was the last time you asked your veterans or went to an ERG meeting if you have a veteran employee resource group or affinity group and just heard the voice from those people? But look at what the experience is of getting into your company as well as working there and continue to grow. And then the N is the numbers. Like, look at your numbers. When you set your mission, did you hit it? Did you not? Did you over accomplish on your mission? Is there, more to this? Look at your numbers, analyze those, and refine the process. And that's kind of the framework that we take companies through. Now, of course, we go into the weeds on this. We look at, your affirmative action plans, your EEO-1 forms, your VETS 4212 for those that are federal contractors, and really do a full deep dive and analysis. But that's the framework that we encourage organizations to utilize, and keep it that simple and then keep repeating. Once you have your numbers, good, bad, or ugly, you go back, you establish a new mission, you keep climbing, you keep doing greater things. Like, diversity is not something that you can just post something on your website and hope that it changes. Like, it takes an investment. It takes a literal village to raise a great program because it's affecting every intersectional person within your company. It affects everybody. It's not just talent. It's not just DEI. It's on all of us to make a more inclusive workplace for our people, no matter what group that we're sourcing from.
Yeah. Love what you said. And I love the loop there of the mission to the numbers. It's one thing to like set a goal or to just a lot of times make a blanket statement like we want to recruit more fill in the blank talent. And then there's like no intentional, consistent like approach to do so. And then I usually get on the back end of that, the blame game. Well, they just don't want to work here. We can't find them. And it's like, well, did you really
Exactly.
try?
And it has to be intentional. Like even those like I saw something like a month ago and I wasn't even aware of it when it happened, but it was like National Hire a Veteran Day. Like, how do you do that? Like it
In
matter
one
of
day.
hiring some right. Like if you have long phased like how do you make it happen that day? Like there's these lofty things that look good on paper, but are impossible. And they're like laughable if you're actually doing that job. Like, how do we hire all the veterans in one day? Like we're only doing hiring offers that day and we're having everybody else at bay until then and waiting in the queue. Like they're not going to accept another job. Like I just see things like that as just weird. It's just like a day late and a dollar short for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm jaded in that, but I just don't see how it's possible of actual execution.
Well, and I think because you know that if you were to really think about this strategically and do your homework, that you're much more likely to have better results than just a one day focus. Because what
Exactly.
that feels like, I think, to people is it feels like that's just like PR. Like this is just my way to get into the news cycle and look good. And it feels very opportunistic and not genuine and authentic, which for folks in marginalized groups, that they're very sensitive and keen to the fact of, I have been discriminated against. I have not felt welcome before. So when you see disingenuous signals like that, sometimes it can cause a backlash effect, even if you had good
100%.
intentions. So listeners, think about that. I think Mount Ben can really work for a lot of diversity dimensions too. And I love how you applied the veteran lens on it, but we'll make sure to document that in our show notes because I think that's a really powerful framework to think through. So thanks for walking us through that, Rob.
Yeah.
Just I'm kind of thinking about our listeners, a lot of doing DEI work in the trenches inside organizations. What do you see? What are you seeing as what's next? What are organizations that are like starting to get this? Like, what are the things, what are the questions that they're asking, or what are the problems they're trying to solve?
One of the biggest problems that I see, especially when we work with organizations, and I think that we're starting to see this more widespread now, where the last 5 years specifically, like diversity is no longer a nice to have for companies. It is a need to have, it is a business imperative. It doesn't only affect your internal culture, but it affects your employer brand and how you're seen by the public eye. And I think that as a society, we're looking for things like that to find out what companies viewpoints and their stance on things resonate with our own because that's who we want to do business with, not only to work there but to buy goods from and services from to support those kind of businesses. The biggest breakdown I see with that, and I think diversity is a beautiful thing. I really think it is one of the best strengths that we have as a humankind is being able to look at things through a diverse set of lenses. But the issue that I always see is the internal communications with an organization. You have all these new figureheads of DEI being put into organizations now that are heading these up, and that's beautiful. But these people aren't armed or equipped, or they're not talking to the doers within the organization. So it's more altruistic, or it's more for PR of getting a word out to these groups. But then DEI is not on the same page as talent acquisition. Who's not talking to the HR compliance people who are being audited by the government agencies like the OFCCP, who aren't talking to the hiring managers and direct supervisors, who aren't talking to the affinity groups and that populace that actually works there to find out, hey, Julie, you're a vet. Why do you work here? And why have you been here for 5 years? And how do we get more people like you? Like, I think it's a communication breakdown that we're not all on the same page, or we're looking at things for a different business case. I've worked with chief financial officers that are looking at veterans because there is a work opportunity tax credit. And just by hiring a great person, you can reap up to a $9,600 tax kickback for hiring a vet. So that's going to resonate with the CFO's eyes. For a recruiter, or they're not going to care at the end of the day whether there's a work opportunity tax credit for the employer. So I think it's mainly about getting the business case, getting everybody on the same page, identifying that same mission, so that when I was talking about that mission, that's the destination that's plugged into the GPS. You have to decide who's on the vehicle and then who's all driving towards that same goal. I think everybody's just kind of looking in different directions, and they're not communicating on the business case of how tapping into this populace or bringing in more people like X actually is good for business and good for those people. Like, I don't think everybody's on the same page. And that's usually the biggest hiccup or hurdle that we have to overcome when we're working with an organization, is getting the right ears at the table and getting the right voices at the table to actually impact change for the organization, and not just, laying lane by lane of the company and hoping it resonates with someone.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because communications, if you have, even if you're lucky enough to have a central DEI person or team, right? A lot of times they're nested within HR, may or may not even have a seat at the main leadership table. And so then how do you disseminate information across the organization to the different functional silos or different business units? And I love what you said, there's different perspectives there, a recruiting perspective, there's a financial perspective, there's a marketing with your brand perspective, right? And then of course there's like the overall inclusion perspective that should pull everyone together, but everyone's going to have a different vantage point on that. And holistically looking at this as a business opportunity from our different seats and finding a way to communicate that across the organization is tricky. And I don't
Right.
think sometimes the work we do with DI folks, I don't always know if they have that skill set too. Sometimes we have to like loop in a communications person that can help connect the dots for folks internally and externally too. So that's been an aha in my work as well. So listeners, if that's something you struggle with, like Rob and I can help.
Yeah.
But just in the spirit of ended on a high note, Rob, what's one thing you'd like our listeners to know that you haven't had a chance to share with us yet today?
One thing with veterans that I will say, and I'm going to start a little bit negatively and then spin this a little more positively. With veterans specifically, I'll be the first to tell you, and I'm sure that some of you even have frustration with this. Our resumes, by and large, are terrible. When we leave the transition offices and leave military bases, we've spent our entire careers, whether that's 4 years or 40 years or anything in between in the military, working as a unit. It's not about, there's no I in team, we're pack animals, everything's about the mission and all this. So we're not used to speaking about what we did as individual contributors. The transition programs are doing their best. However, the resumes that we leave the service with are not always catered to that next position or that individual. When I was leaving, I was an E7 gunnery sergeant leaving active duty from the Marine Corps. And to my left was somebody getting kicked out of the Marine Corps for smoking weed in the barracks. And then to my right was somebody who was retiring after 33 years of successful service, who was an F-18 fighter pilot, actually doing Top Gun stuff. But we all were given the same resume template to work off of and build things on. And then we all went out there with essentially the same resume, talking about the unit and what our units did and whatnot. So that's what you're going to see on your desk. With military specifically, try having conversations with these individuals if you have the opportunity to do so. Hire for character and train for specific skill. We can always train for specific skill. Even if we have people leaving a direct competitor and coming to us, we still have to train them in our way of doing things and our functions, our systems, and everything else. So that is what it is, no matter what industry they're coming from, even if it is a non-traditional talent pool. But if you hire for character and look for the best character that you can in an individual, it's easy to find good seats on the bus for good people later on and find the right thing for them to do. Where military, you're going to have people who are used to working in teams, used to working in chaotic environments that's been part of their DNA. Some of these folks have been doing this job while being deployed away from everything they could ever know in a hostile land where everyone hates them and they're possibly being shot at. And they're still able to do this at a high level, in high degree. So hire for character, train for specific skill with military. If you don't know a lot about military, that's fine. Ask us in interviews. Talk to your veterans that work there. Get to know that underrepresented group with any underrepresented group, not just veterans, but with veterans specifically, rather than trying to boil the diversity ocean and say we are a diverse organization, we love everyone. Like use the military as a microcosm. Use the frameworks that I told you, where 44% of the military are coming from underrepresented groups and other underrepresented groups out there. So you can actually focus on a military program, but also be kind of enhancing or optimizing your greater diversity strategy at the same time with a smaller populace. So hire for character, train for skill, ask questions, get to know a diverse group, and embrace it for the right reasons. Those are the big on the way
That's a
out.
really interesting point on intersectionality that I didn't realize that about 44% of veterans have another dimension of diversity. Did I understand that
Yes.
correctly? So yeah,
Yes.
oh, what a great way to thread all the pieces together. And I love that too. Oftentimes we over review skill sets, existing skill sets, and rather look at them as like we could develop and train and give people experience to develop those skill sets. They don't always have to come. And coming with the right mentality, the right values, the right behaviors, the right mindset is so much more important and much harder to train and cultivate with someone. And I think you've shared a lot of those great attributes that parlay from military experience to the more of the, corporate world, if you will. Rob, thank you so much for being on the show today. You did not disappoint, left us with some tangible, really actionable tips today. Tell our listeners how they can follow your work.
Yeah, and it's great being on with you again, Julie. I love the podcast, love the audience you have and everything. So I appreciate you having me on. So you can simply get a hold of me. So our website is BufferSprings.com. You can get a hold of me at rob@BufferSprings.com. We're on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to look me up on there. My last name is spelled Arndt, Arndt. Like, aren't you going to misspell that last name?
I appreciate that. And we'll link to all this in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for being with us today, Rob.
Awesome. No, thank you so much, Julie. You have a great day. And to the rest of the listeners, thank you so much for your time. And I hope you have great days as well.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.